How's it going, everyone? Welcome to Robert Arms. My name's Rob. I'm the host of this channel. So this marks the beginning of a series of videos that I want to create called Gun Anatomy, where I discuss the origins and internal mechanisms of many common and uncommon firearm platforms. I feel like as the most heavily armed nation on Earth, I find it very surprising how little people know about how many of these weapons that we encounter every day that we see on screen, in YouTube videos, and video games, and movies. It seems like a lot of people don't really know how they work or where they even really came from, or how they were even invented to begin with. Hopefully, these sets of videos that I'm making will hopefully give insight on why that is, and hopefully you guys might be able to learn something in a fun and entertaining way. So, without further ado, let's get started now. So obviously, there is no possible way that I could get started with a video series like this without discussing America's most prolific firearm, the AR-15. These weapons are so common that I honestly don't think anybody really even knows how many Americans own AR-15s. But from the rough guesstimates that I've seen online, those numbers can be upwards of nearly 20 to 40 million, and that's insane. Yeah, these weapons are incredibly common. Now, really, why is that though? Considering that I've spent the past 2 years involved in the firearm manufacturing industry, I can assure you I know exactly why these weapons are so common. It is simply due to the fact that these weapons are easy to mass produce. For example, materials wise, this weapon is made of polymer, machined aluminum, and steel, with obviously probably other materials and components and things of that nature that I might not be aware of. Many people like the fact that the weapon is closely associated with the military. Now, having said that, this weapon is not actually issued to the United States military. Its full auto counterpart, the M4 and the M16, are. Another big reason why these weapons are so common is because of the fact that they're able to be mass produced, they can be sold at a competitive price point. Now, of course, gun owners know damn well that depending on what brand you get in terms of quality of your AR-15, you might be very picky about that. But for the most part, most Americans live paycheck to paycheck, and they can't exactly afford top-notch, NATO Death Squad stuff. So of course they're going to go with your low budget AR builds and things of that nature, and that's another reason why a lot of first time gun owners often purchase AR-15s. Another good reason why they're so heavily used is because of the fact that these weapons are very modular. They are probably the most modular weapon on the US market. There are so many aftermarket parts for AR-15s out there that it's very hard to pass up buying an AR-15 simply because of the fact that you can customize the weapon any way you want. Now, a good reason to attribute that to is because of the fact that most AR-15s are built within a mil-spec standard. Mil-spec is kind of another word for military specification. When these weapons were first adopted, at least the full auto variants, by the US military, the AR-15 was built to a certain spec. That means parts are completely interchangeable with each other. This was due to logistical reasons. In the civilian world, that means convenient spare parts. So, of course, readily available spare parts, along with the fact that companies pretty much have their own licenses to make all their own different versions of the AR-15, means, of course, people are going to prefer to have the AR-15 at their side. But I think the biggest reason why the AR-15 is such a common weapon to own is because of its reliability and its great design. That could be attributed to its inventor, which leads into my next segment, the lore. You guys better buckle up for this ride because it's a long one. If you want to skip this portion and just go straight into how this weapon actually works on the inside, I'll label some timestamps below. Fuck, what the fuck? The AR-15 was invented by this guy in the spiffy bow tie and the really nice looking rifle. His name was Eugene Stoner, and like many great men of his era, he had served during the Second World War as a United States Marine. During his time in the Marine Corps, he became very familiarized with a lot of different weapon systems. The M1 Garand, the Browning automatic rifle, and more notably, the M1941 Johnson rifle, which we'll pay attention to that here in a minute. After his service in the Marine Corps, he took up a job as a machinist at a company called Whitaker, which was an aircraft parts manufacturer, where he learned how to machine aircraft-grade aluminum. This is a very important aspect of his knowledge in developing the AR-15. So during his time at Whitaker, he had combined his knowledge of machining aircraft-grade aluminum with the knowledge he absorbed from tinkering with firearms and created his first prototype, the M5 self-loading rifle. This weapon, which had a receiver machined out of aircraft-grade aluminum, also had a lot of other aspects of its design borrowed from older designs. For example, it used a Browning automatic rifle magazine, so the weapon was chambered in .30-06. It used a trigger and cycling system similar to the M1 Garand, and also, most notably, had a M1941 Johnson rifle style rotating bolt locking lug design, which he would attribute to all the other prototypes that he would make for the rest of his career. Now, after a period of time of working for Whitaker over the span of the rest of the 40s and the early 50s, he would end up developing a lot of different prototypes, which would lead to what I would argue his most important prototype, the M8 self-loading rifle. This weapon utilized his theoretical gas system that he would call direct impingement. He would apply this to all of his other future designs. So while he was at the firing range testing some of his prototypes, he had ran into, by fate, a high-level executive of a company called Armalite. If you're familiar with this company, you know exactly where this is going. When he had met with this fellow, I believe his name was George Sullivan, he had noticed that Eugene Stoner's designs were very futuristic compared to a lot of other weapons he had ever seen. When he went up to Eugene Stoner and asked him about his prototypes, this man realized that Stoner may have become the face of the future of all weapon design. After their conversation, Sullivan offered Eugene Stoner a job at Armalite for their lightweight weapons program, and Eugene Stoner humbly accepted. This would lead to Stoner becoming a chief engineer with a team of engineers to develop a lot of his prototypes into what we know now today as the AR-10 battle rifle. Yes, he invented the AR-10 before the AR-15. Now, during that era in the early 1950s, the Army was interested in replacing the M1 Garand service rifle. Disgusting, I know. But it had to be done because a lot of other nations around the world, most notably the Soviet Union, were interested in replacing a lot of their older bolt actions and other service rifles from the World War II era with newer and more well-made battle rifles. Now, with the development of the .308 Winchester cartridge or the 7.62x51 NATO standard cartridge, the Army was interested in adopting a weapon that was chambered in that round. So the Army decided to start doing some tests with some prototypes from a lot of different companies to see which one would end up being adopted by the Army. Of course, Springfield Armory submitted their experimental M14 rifle. FN sent a licensed copy of an FAL, which, frankly, I feel like should have won. Armalite ended up submitting their AR-10. And through a lot of weapons test trials, it seemed that the AR-10 seemed to be the more favorable weapon during that period by U.S. soldiers. It was reliable, lightweight, and the gas system was very revolutionary at the time. But of course, bureaucracy and politics played a huge role in why the AR-10 did not end up in the hands of U.S. soldiers. Eventually, after a period of tests and red herrings, the M14 ended up being the weapon that was adopted, and the AR-10 kind of ended up dead in the water for a while. Now, Armalite was able to license the AR-10 to the Netherlands for a short period of time for their military, but they weren't able to get their way into another weapons program. But luckily, the M14 started to encounter problems, especially when it started being heavily used during the Vietnam War. During that early period, a lot of soldiers complained that the M14 was a very heavy rifle to tote around. The .308 Winchester cartridge, as good as it was and hard-hitting, simply could not compete with the fact that a lot of the communist forces that they were fighting were wielding much lighter, intermediate AK-47 assault rifles. A lot of soldiers felt like they were being outgunned with lighter, better weapons in the field and in the jungles of Indochina. So the Army decided to come up with a new program for a more lighter weight weapon that shot a smaller, high-velocity cartridge, similar to what we know now as the .223 Remington cartridge. So when Armalite got word of it, Eugene Stoner and his team of engineers went right to work with developing a weapon that would end up leading to what we know now today as the AR-15. Once the AR-15 was fully developed by Armalite, they decided to submit it for the weapons test trials, and it was a reliable, lightweight system, and the round that it fired proved to be effective around the 300-yard range, which is what the Army had requested. Now, the Army did put up a fight about adopting it since it was so loved and enamored by the clearly outdated M14 that a lot of elements of our government, after seeing the weapon in use in test trials, pushed the Army to try to adopt it as the next service rifle, including President John F. Kennedy. This allowed enough pressure on the Army to formally adopt it as the next service weapon, and Armalite sold the license to Colt to manufacture what we know now as the M16A1. This weapon would end up being the next service rifle to the United States, and the rest was history. What does that mean for the civilian rifles? Well, of course, people wanted their own version of the military's weapon. So Colt ended up making sporter versions of the M16, such as the AR-15, Sporter SP1, and a bunch of various other designs, up until the licensing for the AR-15 ended up becoming public, and then every other company decided to make their own version of the AR-15, and that's why you see them all so often today. Yeah, so that was a hell of a lot of yapping. There's a lot more history to that I probably glossed over. Sure enough, I can't just sit here and explain for 4 to 5 hours how the AR-15 was developed. But if you do want to sit through and listen to all that, I will link below a lot of the information that I used for this video down in the description below, specifically the Stoner tapes, which is a very good documentary about this weapon. Now that all that has been said, let me go ahead and show you how this weapon works on the inside.
The AR-15 uses a gas/direct impingement system. First, a loaded magazine is inserted into the rifle. The bolt, if locked to the rear, is released via the bolt release lever or is racked via the charging handle to chamber a round. When the safety is disengaged, the shooter pulls the trigger to release the hammer, swinging itself to impact the back of the firing pin located inside of the bolt carrier group itself. The firing pin ignites the primer in the cartridge, causing a reaction with gunpowder to launch the bullet via explosive gases through the bore. As the bullet launches itself, a porthole cut into the barrel reroutes the high-pressure gas, redirecting it into the gas key, which is screwed and staked to the bolt carrier. The pressure launches the bolt carrier to the rear, twisting the locking lugs and bending the extractor, flinging the spent brass out of the chamber. As the bolt reciprocates to the rear, it compresses itself on the buffer tube spring, then decompresses, forcing the bolt carrier group forward. The bolt feeds a new round into the chamber. Once all the way into battery, the locking lug secures itself in the recesses of the bore and chambers the new round. And as this happens, the trigger group and hammer is reset, ready to start the process all over again.